Yo, what's up? This one's been a little minute, but I'm working on this project. Just started yesterday because I need another tune for potentially an EP, like the next like hospital thing I'm working on. So kind of started building some drums out yesterday and like getting a vibe. And for once, I'm just gonna walk you through it. So I'm actively gonna be working on this project as we go through this video. But this specific like section, there'll be two parts. This first part is going to be just layering some drums because I got some kick samples I'm putting together, and then some snare / clap type deals I'm putting together. Then I'll kind of piece the rest after that. So part one, this video you're watching, is going to be layering some drums and what I do, how I go about that. Then the second part is going to be like processing further. So I have like all the drums mapped out already. So second part is going to be kind of fitting them together, processing the drums as a group and fitting them into the project as a whole, probably. So yeah, this one a bit off the cuff as I am gonna I'm still actively in like create mode. So feel free to skip around. I'll put some chapter markers and stuff in there. And yeah, Patreon saw this first. So if you want to support me in everything I do, if you like these things, gain some kind of value, head on over there. But till then, let's do this thing. All right, so we're in the project, and I'll zoom out. This is kind of everything. A lot of these are stems because I'm basically remixing a tune of mine. It's not out yet either, but it's like I made like a 140 like deep kind of dubstep tune. Yeah, I know, right? Weird. But got a lot of good reactions from hospital about that, but they want like a drum and bass tune, so it makes sense. I'm not just coming out of the blue with 140, you know, even though I like it, and like you guys probably know I like it, like to the wider, you know, audio, whatever, that kind of thing. But anyway, I'll let you hear it. It sounds like so far some things are muted because they just, like you think you're gonna just switch tempos and things will kind of fit, but there's some messiness going on. But for now, I just play like the main groove. That's all I got so far. Here we go. So the main vibe's there. I did quite a bit of work on it yesterday. But yeah, main vibe, the groove. Groove is most important. But yeah, it's basically there, but it needs some tightening up, some fixing. Yeah, anyway, so all these little bits up here are just drums. It looks like a lot, but I really just made like a loop, then copy paste it over. So here we go. We got kick sample, one that's muted. So that's 2 layer kicks. Honestly, they sound kind of fine, but I know some character things here and there I'm going to change. So we got like one sample. So that was just in one loop. And then another one. I just did some things to them already. So first of all, before we even get into this, let's talk about what I look for when, you know, picking samples, because sample selection is huge. Like it's one of those like, I don't know, buzz phrases instead of a buzzword. I don't know, like, yeah, you want to start with strong samples instead of trying to like, you know, start with something and then trying to like force it into being something else. Like already these have, for me, like a lot of punch, nice solid low end, some good character elements. Like it's not necessarily kick, but like the fizziness or some textures on top, stuff like that. So before I even start, I'm just sample hunting, right? So I'm looking for a specific sound. So something like this is techie, right? It means like short drums, short, punchy. There's space in between because it's the, you know, to get all jazz, it's the notes in between the notes. It's the space in between that makes them have that effect. But like if I was going for something like break heavy or jungly, I might be a little looser or something like that, or like not even drum and bass specific. Like if I want to make trance, do I want like a really like 909 like that kind of like psytrance kick, terrible like sound effect? Or do I want like a thumpy like house kick, or all these characteristics or stuff you want to think about ahead of time? Because, you know, my buzzword is intentionality. Knowing what you want to do before you do it cuts down on the, you know, the sample hunting time. Okay. So I'm thinking about the sound. Do I want organic drums? Do I want synthesized sound? Do I want a hybrid? For me personally, always a hybrid, because you get that, you know, the fullness of synthesized drums and the punch and like just the electronicness and like consistency. But then you get like an organic top layer, so it feels like a reinforced, not records, a reinforced like organic sounding drum. It's me. All right, the style of this techie, usually for me, I like short samples because drum and bass is busy and my style of drums is very busy. So it's going to be like, and then there's swing and then there's groove and all this other stuff. So what I did like ahead of time to prep, you flip over to Splice, which not sponsored by them, but I like, it's the best way to like look through my Splice samples because I'm not organized in any kind of way. So I scrolled through like a bunch of kicks and a bunch of snares, and I labeled it techie because that's kind of the vibe I want. I've never really done this before, like, so I made a little playlist and all that stuff in here. Let's listen to a couple things, like you can kind of get an idea of what I was looking for. Okay, that's kind of an effect snare, so that's already off to a bad start, Duncan. But see, that kind of like a rim hat, so I'm feeling like that's kind of a textured kind of layer. Maybe for like a ghost snare, something like that, maybe the main one. Another one, really textured. Not a lot of body there, so that's why I'd layer, so I can find something with some body in it. Okay, big rim shot. It's kind of wide, and like there's a lot of air into it. Again, top layer kind of texture, mid layer maybe. Mid as in volume, not mid as in frequency. There's a whole lot of ways to look at things. Okay, there you go. There's some fundamental in there. Nice like punch. Yep. Then you got some, you can see the like sound, the sample packs, TB, Teddy Killers, wonderful samples. Like this, I've used this a bunch and kind of tweaked it. It's got that really nice like full body and a little fizz up top. Another one, that'd be like a body kind of layer. Another one, deeper, that one's kind of more a chesty snare. Again, kind of has the body, but has like the kind of hi-hats to the side, has a bit of air to it. Listen to it again. Yeah. Bigger one. So that'd be like an in phrase kind of snare. Like you have like a tight snare, like right at the end, you know? Something like that. I'll show it in context. I'm pretty sure I picked a couple out of these. Really tight. And there's a little extra in there. So that like, I'm pretty sure I use that one. And it has like a little, seems like a crowd sound, but again, texture. If like you listen to my music, you hear a lot of like organic kind of claps and sounds with the you know, kind of synthesized almost sounding like fundamental of the snare. Like think green, gray, blue. Like you can hear like different claps and stuff, every other clap and things like that. It's a layer. It's like not the main thing. For some context, snappy has a cool little effect that I end up using. Clean snare. Again, it's all about the samples you start with. So these are all kind of have the same characteristic of, if there's a body layer I'm considering, it's punchy, it's full bodied. If I think about the physicality of what I'm hearing, does it feel like it's in my chest? Does it feel like it's in my throat? Is it like kind of just, it's kind of like a tick, or is it like a, like, you know, all these kind of things. So, you know, there's some snare and kick layers because that's all I really need for this one. Because like once it comes to shakers and breaks, I kind of have those set up already. Because I, to be fair, just use the same ones all the time. When they work, they work. But yeah, back in. So now we got those. Let's flip back over to the DAW. Let's show how they look before so I did some processing, but that's a couple steps ahead. So if I take this, just this kick sample. Yeah, that's it. That's what I started with, right? So it's basically like 2-bar loop. There's a nice ghost kick. I All right, so if we listen to this one, right, this first kick, as if making it bigger is gonna make you hear it any better. It's zoomed in too. It's not that loud. It's loud though, because TB like works as samples. But anyway, coffee sip. Not tea today. So this first kick, right? You kind of have some top end. You have some crunch to it, a little bit. It's a bit longer. This one is more 909-ish, right? So if we go, not a whole lot of top end, just kind of chesty. It's like when you gulp. I try to add some physicality because to like the sound, describe it that way. So when you're like that, like a big swallow, or I don't know, like TV cartoons, and like you're nervous, so you go, uh-oh, that kind of feeling. That's how I think of it. Because this ghost kick is going to kind of blend in and be more felt in the mix instead of sticking out. So the first kick, you're going to hear it. It marks the beat. It's punchy. The second one's kind of just back a little bit. So, yep, it's very dry. So if we bring up this other sample I had, which is just another from the same sample pack from TB, bring it all the way out. I even did some gain on it just to make it a little quieter. But now I'm going to listen to this by itself. With no EQ, by the way. Now this one's punchier. It's chesty. It's like high chest where the other one felt like some bottom. It was thumpy. You know what I mean? And you see like the first kick has a little muted, very dry. Second one, there's like a kind of a shaker laid on top for some top end, some fizz. I don't really want that. But when I'm talking about layering, think about this kick, like very solid, very down there, you know? And this fizz kind of chesty, bit more punch, bit more air to it slightly, okay? There's a couple things. So first of all, it's a stereo sample. So if I take it off, make it stereo again, now you get that air. But for me, I don't really want that in this case. I want like a very direct down the middle sound. Again, it's all about the sound you're going for. Keep that in mind. So I click this little button here that collapses it to mono, a mono channel, not straight down the middle. Okay. And when I put that on top of this one, yeah, you can already hear them clashing because, I mean, both low ends are going. If I throw this up here, so you listen to one, very full range. If I listen to the other, you can kind of see the shape. So that's that kick. Yeah, this one has like a big peak right there, like 50. And this one is more kind of ramped. So like starts at 100, like goes down, which means kicks kind of do, synthesized in real kicks. Anyway, so if I want the top end of this one, because I like the air on it, and that one's pretty low, I want the texture. That's what I'm going for. So what I do here is I just roll off the low end. So if we reel it back, I'm just going to push it up till there's no low end, and I kind of get that top end texture. There's still a bit of punch. There's still kind of that like pitched down character to it, which will come in handy later, or I'll like really like. So here we go. I'm at like 304 hertz, high passed, nothing too drastic, but already stick it on the other one, and I'll just loop it. Not that much, dummy. I don't think I even use this kick, so let me cut it out, mute it. Yeah, it's pretty, like, it's already like rumbly, clashing, high pass it. Already fits so much better. Now with this one, we had some, what I found is that you got to think of like the phase of the kick. So you have like the little wave, right? And I've done this before in a stupid roundabout way. But phase is the wave, and I'll show you visually for a second. But if you have like this wave, right? And then you have another wave under it, and they're going the same way, right? Same rate, everything. they're in phase. If this one's doing this and this one's like going in the opposite, then they're out of phase. And that's when you get that like cancel out or some weird kind of artifacts in the mix. And if they're slightly off, you'll get different kind of characters. I'll show you in a second how it sounds. So how it sounds now, because I already lined it up. But if we look at this one, and what I'm gonna do is pull it back. So see, like the actual sample started like that. That's not too bad. But as I move it, see now one punch is kind of gone from the top kick, right? Keep going. Now it's just kind of drastic. But if I move it all the way back to where I had it, it's in this way. So I'm like kind of visualizing in a sense, like, so this is technically kind of like, they're not going to completely line up, sure. But like the transients are these busy pieces up front are lined up to my taste. Again, it's not, while we're looking at it visually, it is very much an auditory thing. So, and also with collapsing this one down to mono, the waveform technically will look a little bit different. But yeah, that's kind of where we are. It's lined up. These are kind of opposite actually, but in the way they're, like if I wanted to like really line them up and make sure all the waves were like move the same way. Yeah, not too much difference. And sometimes it's not. I'm just say that, you know, if this is your first time watching one of these, I'm going to, you know, self-correct in things as I work through, because sometimes like after long sessions, I think I'm doing something I'm really not. So, but in this case, it definitely fit because there's a way it worked. And yeah, I remember there are two different pitches. This is more high pitch kick down here. This is lower. So the like the wave length is going to be different. Lower is going to be longer, and then higher pitch is going to be like shorter, you know, like shorter wavelength, big wavelength. So they kind of work to each other. Now, I know you might be thinking, like, what about the key of the kick? In this case, doesn't really matter. Some kicks are very tonal. This bottom one is, but because the top one isn't, it's more just like I've took out most of the fundamental, because if I didn't, let me play both. You can hear like the difference. It's trying to like, they're fighting against each other. But once you EQ that out, doesn't really matter. All right. So again, kind of looked at the beginnings, matched the phase. This one is like a full loop. And I think I just took like a middle kind of kick out of it. Yeah. So that already, that's pretty solid, right? Would you agree? I can't hear you if you say you do, but anyway, let me know in the comments. Now, all I did next was kind of sculpt the sound, just basic, like, all right, I want it a little bit shorter, okay? So in this case, it ends where I want it to end. Yep. That's kind of loose. That makes sure that, like, so if you compare like this last, like, I don't know, a little over 2/8 notes. We got one, if you look at the grid, it's in 1/8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 16th, my bad. And I just shorted it to make it complete 2/6. I mean, that's just, it's a sound, because it's not like fully on the grid if you look at it. Because like long, lots of tail, short, just punch. Same thing for this. I kind of made them the same length at first, but that top like texture is a little bit too much for me. Too long for me in a way. So I pulled it back. So it's just like the initial hit has that texture on it. Right? Okay. I made it a little shorter. The fades are like not scientific. It's just, it's a taste. I heard it, sounded good. Okay. Now, second part, this, because I showed it earlier. So there's a ghost kick in here, right? And I wanted to make sure I give that kind of the same treatment. My cat's trying to get in the door. Now this is where the groove comes in. So I have like these two ghosts, right? Basically like the muted kind of kick. Sounds like a heartbeat. My heart beats at 174 BPM because I'm a true junglist. Get out of here. Anyway, so similar thing, and I didn't layered the other kick. You see one shorter than the next. Because if you think of it like an actual, drummer, every time they hit the kick, it's not really going to be the same length. I mean, some drummers are completely robotic, where it's like it's bang on every time. But that first one's going to be a little shorter. The next one's going to breathe a little bit more, just slightly. We're talking milliseconds here, especially how fast things are. But you do feel it. You're not going to be like, oh man, that third kick in that loop was a little longer, and it really made the dance floor go off. Like, no, it's a felt thing, So, same thing. Made it short, a little bit longer. This is the same sample, but when you layer it, depending on what's under it, has a different character. So you have the big kick, right? Full. Everything we worked on before. Ghost kick, a little quieter, a little shorter. Hear it. Still has that top end kind of fizz. It's a little less though. A little less. Because what's under it is more subdued. It's a different character. It's a different sound. Similar thing. I didn't do a whole lot of different like phase stuff here because it doesn't really matter to me. Like I chopped off a little bit of the beginning. For the most part, if you look at it visually, it's, two different pitches. It's not really going to line up, but auditorially, auditorially, the way you hear it, it's fine. All right. So all together, this is just my kick groove. Yep. So you have the first kick, solid coming through. I'm gonna do a little bit more volume balance, but solid coming through. The next, a little bit quieter, a little bit shorter, so they feel more organic. It's not just shotgunning samples like dot 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 dot. You know what I mean? It's not house anyway. So it's basically like the beginnings of the layering. If I check my notes, what else am I leaving out? So we went here. We decided what we wanted ahead of time, right? Then you go through, you find your samples, you collect them in whatever way you choose. I use Splice in this case, or the Splice app, because that's where the samples came from. Then you do basic layering. So you have like what I'm calling visual prep. You're lining them up, you're checking phase, you're shortening tails, because in that tail there might be a little bit of reverb, there might be a little bit of extra sound, there might be something you want, something you don't want, but you want to make sure you hear it, okay? And then from there, you're just kind of getting a basic sound. So we got some basic things lined up, a basic groove, and the snare is going to hit on the, the 2 and the 4, and that's basically it. So what I'm going to do kind of show you real quick, but that's basically what I did with the snare as well. Snare's got 3 layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. Quick version. So finished as in basic, layered basically. Here's the snare. Very short, nice little clap, nice fundamental. This is going to be a bass heavy tune, so I don't need any big thump or anything. It just marks time more or less. Let me move it over here just for posterity, because that's where it'll go in the actual loop. So we have 3 different samples. If you listen to this top one, remember that's that like hi-hat, high-end texture, clean, solid snare. Had a little bit extra, but I cut off that tail. Remember, you want to shorten it depending on what you want. Maybe you want that extra bits in there. It's all up to you. Then we got another layer, which take off the EQ. Yeah, it kind of has that like kung fu, like movie kung fu punch kind of character to it, like the psh, like that kind of thing. And then I just EQ'd out to get what I want. There's a little bit of harmonic in there. There's a little bit of air, a little bit of something. And I know further down the line, when I bust these all together and start working and compressing all that, it's going to bring it up. It's going to give me the character I want. Because the whole point of layering drums is to get a specific sound, a specific character. Otherwise, just stick with one drum sample and be good. You know what I mean? So, layer it all together. Just basically, again, it's all lined up. Yeah, this one had a lot more to it. I just shortened it. So, like, It starts back there, right? Did I stretch it? Nope, didn't stretch it. I pitched it up a little bit, but So I'm mostly taking the tail, and that's my high end, right? Then I got this one, body, cool. Tail, fade in the tail or fade out, shorten it so it makes sense in the context of what I'm going for, which is just short drums. And then another one, character, flavor, all together. So yeah, everything I just told you about the kick, I did the same with those. So now we have our groove. Move that over. Where's it supposed to? Am I just being dumb? No, this one. 2 and the 4. Come on. You're professional. Anyway. That's my basic groove. There's always more tweaks to be had. Like in this one just so far, because I haven't done any more work than this. Yeah, this is as far as I got last night after a couple hours because I was really trying to get a vibe down instead of sit there and mix. Coffee break. Cheers. So, back at it. What would I do from here? Okay, we check the notes. Said check with context. So in this case, what I would do, just to make sure I got the sound I want, because when you're looping something over and over and over, you start to hear it less. You know, you might dial in on what it sounds like by itself, and you kind of develop this idea, this feeling. But within context of like maybe a simple bass line or a simple like piano loop or a break, something else, it's going to feel different. It's going to function differently. Okay. So come back. And my context was basically like bring in a shaker I use. What do I think? And just something slightly like that. You're going to hear it differently because the context changes. If I add in this little bass riff, context is going to change. It's going to feel different. See, now I'm not really hearing the low end of the kick, but I'm hearing the low end of the bass and how they kind of fighting each other because I haven't done any more processing. But it gives you an idea of where you're going with the sample. Because again, intentionality. If you know what you want ahead of time, you spend less time trying to figure it out, you know. But, well, you displace the time. You figure it out ahead of time, so you're not trying to figure out in the middle, and then you get in writer's block, and you're stuck looping something over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Or maybe that's just me. Anyway, back at it. So at this point, I make sure to group each thing. So bus group, whatever term you want to use, it's up to you. So in Studio One, and there's a couple ways to do it, but for me, I'll stick them in a folder. Ableton has groups. Cubase has buses groups. Assign bus channel. What else? Logic has track stacks. That's what it is. I prefer this just so I can like, you know, organization. So now it's in its own bus, right? So each individual sound is routed to this. You can kind of see it in this little window here. Okay? So I'm gonna call this kick. All right? And to be fair, it sounds solid. All right, and this one, same treatment. Pack folder. Add a bus. It'll automatically route them all. Now I'm gonna call this one Snare. Just put it in caps. I'm not gonna color anything just yet. So organization wise, let's pull it up. Boom, you got kick and snare. So now what I would do, just going with the kick. Again, I'm actively working on this, so this might be a while. This might not be anything. But I'm not going to, you know, half do it just to make this video shorter. You can skip around. I'm going to edit a little bit, you know how it goes. Anyway, how are you guys doing? You all right out there? Yeah, so take a little bit out of that out. Because that, yeah, so EQ first step is usually for me just like get a good balance. It's going to change as I add more effects and do different things. But I want to start there. So I'm hearing that. Let's make a little dip. Nothing too crazy. It's got a lot of like mids that I don't necessarily need. And I know even later down the line, I'll take them out. It was like, I could just hear, little things. Cool. All right, now I'm gonna add another EQ because I like how it high passes. So I wouldn't do that, but I'd come up to like, see, it's starting to fall apart. 39. Yeah, I kind of like the 22. So it's just like slightly high passing at 22 hertz. Super low, and like you might not hear it, feel it kind of thing. You feel it, but it does kind of alter the character of the top end. I'm bringing the low end back, but in a different kind of way. Okay, so if we bring in like an oscilloscope, how is it looking? Lots of peak, right? I don't really need that peak. So what I'm gonna do there, it's a couple different ways, mostly just equates to some kind of compression, limiting, distortion, saturation, something like that. Because I'm gonna just squash it, basically. So what I've been using lately is a little radiator from Sound Toys. Gives me this sound. Off. Then on. Just adds like a cool something. Push it. Bring the mix down. And what'd that do? Limited it in a bit. If I take it off, it's quieter. This feels more put together. Ew. I might move some plugins around. Yeah. So, nothing. Just a couple plugins. Yeah, I wanted to hit hard. So after this, I'm kind of feeling maybe another EQ to shape. It's one of my favorites, the Mag 4, EQ4. Take a mid-range. I could do it in Pro Q, but this, like, even just turning this plugin on does something. Gives it a character. Again, I'm going for character. Don't need that. I'm going to add like top end and stuff later on when I've processed like everything, all the drums. So maybe want a context, so give me something else to listen to. It's a snare. It'll make your ears perk up just differently, slightly different enough till you might hear something you didn't hear before. And with no plugins, same contextual observation. I don't know what I'm saying. A bit weak, right? But I'm also used to the slightly louder processed version, so. Might work with the snare going. See, now I'm going back and adjusting like fades and stuff because as I'm listening, I'm hearing in my head the sound I want and I'm going for. And with this processing, there's some things peeking out, like a little bit of this, like top end is lasting a bit more. It's not tapering off the way it was before with more plugins and like compression and stuff. So I'm adjusting. Yeah. Yeah. If you look at just the level over here, all the way to the left, you can see with no plugins, it's really peaking almost to zero. And with plugins, I've tamed that a bit. So it's something to keep in mind as you're working. Because later down the line, you're always going to be like taming peaks and stuff that you don't necessarily hear, but plugins will react to, and they may react kind of funny if you don't do it right. So now I have like a limiter on at the end in my master so it doesn't peak. But right now, it's not really doing anything. But you can see in its own thing that snare is super peaky, right? But the kick is kind of tamed. Me, for my drum sound, I like everything to be kind of in the same space, really tame. So the kick's in a good spot. Let's move over to the snare. So first things first, EQ. All this low end I do not need. Too much? There you go. And just listening to a loop, listening it on loop like that. At first, I was really hearing the transient. I wasn't paying too much attention to like the tail, but now I'm hearing the tail more. The more loops. So remember, it's super peaky. If we bring this over here, yeah, that's okay. It's all getting limited to hell later anyway, but right now, what do I want? Let's try compressor. So we're gonna go supercharger, one of my favorites that I will slap over the entire drum bus later. But for this, very extreme. So with this one, you really want to adjust the input till it's like yellow. It's like the sweet spot, and I'm gonna back off. Lots of compression. I really want to just do a few. Make sure I level match. Now what I like to do is use this dirt, which has like a nice saturation punch. Makes it punchier. There we go. I know it's louder, so yeah. Oh, Duncan, you think it sounds better? I'm gonna level match it. Give me a second. So, bypass. Bring it down. Yeah, it just kind of tightens it up. So, no compression. And then with compression, level matched. I definitely feel the transient a little bit more. And it feels tighter to me. Let's give it some context with the kick. I'm starting to feel different about the kick. But that's because they aren't matched together. That snare is pretty loud compared to the kick. And the snare could use a bit more, maybe limiting saturation. So I'm gonna go for that radiator again because I really like the character it gives me. How long is it so far? Shit, 40 minutes. I'm gonna edit some of this. So now we're here. It adds some noise. I don't need that. That's way too much. That's starting to feel unbalanced. Like I hear more in my left ear than the right. Which is okay, because kind of parallel compression. Yeah. Now, see, it's really bringing up that side, that noise character I was talking about earlier. And in that case, you want to reach for an EQ. Because you're doing some mid-side processing. Even added some low end I didn't want. Okay, I'll catch that later. But if you just listen to the sides, right? So you have side information. That's super wide, mono-ish. Like, and this is personal kind of preference. Taking out some of the sides because I know later on I'm going to add my own reverb, my own kind of room sound. And working on headphones, like when there's something that you don't want there, it's super annoying to hear all the time. So that already tightened it up for me. And next thing, transient shaper. Just kind of give it a little bit of shape. So that tail, not that far. Always A being to make sure I'm not just convincing myself it sounds better when it doesn't. No plugins. Passive EQ. Sounds good to my ears. Rolling off 68. There's a little bit of low end. The lower end of the snare. Also, yeah. How's it sound mono? Nah, see. Volume adjustment. Adjusting the tail. So this I'm doing is before all that processing, right? Because we're in a bus. So it's going to affect how the plugins I have on it are working. If I make something longer, like that sound could honestly work for like a different part of the track. Again, keeping the context of what this is all for, you know? So because I'm actually working on this tune, let me make a version that has that. Just bring it over here. And then copy that because these two are the same. Remember, I'm working in mono. Let's make a stereo again. And honestly, that's kind of it. I'm trying to think of more steps, but as I'm working on it, but as far as just getting the sample how I want it to sound, kind of a starting point for after layering, this is pretty good. So let me check notes real quick. So what do we do in this last step? So we sculpted a bit further. We adjusted volume, right? So, different layers started reacting or coming through differently as we compressed and EQ'd and things like that. So we always stayed flexible with that volume, right? So some layers, like the top end of that snare, we had to bring down a little bit, right? On the ghost kicks, we had to bring some levels down a little bit so it matches. Okay, EQ'd out that super low end out of that snare because I don't need any 30 hertz in my snare. Come on. Stuff like that, just sculpting the sound so the samples fit together. You can EQ them separately, but when you EQ them together, you're changing the overall sound. You're not really changing the amount of ingredients going in the dish. You know what I mean? Something like that. Texture, we added some slight distortion, some slight saturation. It gave it a little bit of something. Effects would have been similar, but in this case, do I want reverb, a little extra tail? And we did I decided that I wanted a bit more tail in one part, so I made another section where that snare has a longer tail, because in the context of the full tune, that's going to add a lot more energy and a lot more splash, and I really want that. While the main snare body and is very consistent in where I want it. Then we went processing. So we grouped everything by what it was. So we grouped the snares together in a bus, grouped the kicks together. Again, you EQ'd for balance at the bus level, not the individual level. Need to get something to drink. Anyway, one take. Let's go. We made some character choices about distortion, about going back to the track level and making tails and things here a little bit different. And it says small reverb. I didn't get there yet because I'm going to add that towards the end. I know what I'm looking for, so it's going to be a very short ambience type reverb. Valhalla Vintage Verb is my go-to. Compression, clipping, limiting at the bus level. Did I even do that? Yeah, that's what superchargers, compression, radiators, a little distortion, a little bit of limiting, a little bit of all that. Yeah. And to consider it finished at this step of just layering and getting my sound that I want. So there's different starting points, right? So our first starting point was just gathering the samples that we knew or we thought or hoped for what I would turn into something that I wanted, right? Not the perfect thing, not the end result, but I'm taking one starting point to the new starting point, okay? So now, once we're finished with that section of creating the bass sample, I might bounce it. I might just let it stay in the project as it is and tweak as I go. Because me personally, I'm afraid of commitment. No, it's just how I work. But at this sense, you could just bounce these out and start working on them individually. So if I wanted to bounce both of these, I'd go export stems and scroll all the way down to where I made them. So we got kick, snare, and I'm going to give it a little title, WXYZ, C, D. I got to name it the track so I know. Yeah. And that's be the little prefix thing. They don't really need to be 32-bit. I don't care about any of that. Preserve all this stuff. Import to track. Boom. Between the loop. I'm doing kick and snare at the bus level. So after that, goes through, bounces them. Boom. There they are, the finished thing. So I make sure they're not in that folder, so they're not routed to that bus. So now we have kick and snare. That's what I just made. Now, from bouncing it, the way some plugins work is they have like the activation time. So this kick's kind of soft. Because if you listen to the actual one, punch is there full. This one's kind of faded in. So what I'm gonna do in this case is I'm gonna just copy this over. I'm gonna let it run for a bit, right? This would be enough. And then I'm gonna bounce again. And some DAWs do this. Sometimes it's a latency thing. Sometimes it's a something else thing. You know, everything's got its quirks. All right, I gotta unmute some stuff. So let's come back to that. Come back to that. Make sure what I want is selected. So we got kick because that's what we want. Boom, bounce. Now you can kind of see how the beginning like fades in on this one, but this one is right there. That's the one I want. Okay. So in this case, I'll just cut out that section of the loop, and that's my kick stem. That's what I'm going to work with from now on. Maybe. In the context of this video, yeah. But I'll probably do some more tweaking. And from here, it's basically just... All right, that's still not muted. But from here, I'm probably will split out this ghost kick, these two. I'll do some effects on these. Not effects, but just tweak them a little bit, like volume. Because again, context of the full tune, they're going to feel different. That snare's solid for my liking. But yeah. So, quick wrap up. What do? We had our idea first. We decided what kind of sound we want for our drums. In this case, kick and snare. Honestly, if you're going to look for any kind of samples or start with any kind of idea, you always want to know kind of what you want to do first. Like sometimes I might just open up the DAW, fly blind, see what happens. But remember, I had like kind of a prompt. It's going to be like a remix to something else of my own tune. So I had an idea. I want something short, punchy. It fit in like a more techie drum and bass context. So I looked for samples with that. Kicks had punch, snares had punch. I looked for some extra layers because I like the organic sound on top of that synthesized sound. We found that. We collected our samples within Splice, right? Then we put them in the DAW. We started just visually prepping. So lining up the samples, checking phase, checking tails. Do I want this extra splash, or do I want a really tight, clean sound? Adding fades, making things shorter, longer, whatever. You can even go a step further and like name everything how you want it. So like body of the snare, top of the snare, fizz of the snare, whatever. I'm not that thorough. Then again, consistently we want to check with context because these things are going to sound different once we start adding other layers. I add a bass line, the kick feels different. I add a melody, kick feels different. You know, things like that. Then next step is sculpting, again at the individual track level. So like one snare had a bit too much tail, shortened it, too much low end in it. I didn't need it. EQ'd it out, high passed it. One was the body of the snare. It's very short. Out of context, it kind of sounds dumb. But in context, it's just like, it's right there. It's hitting what I needed to hit. I didn't EQ much of it. I don't think I EQ'd it at all. And then there's a texture layer. Had a little bit of fizz, a little bit of wideness to it, a little bit of room sound. I put that in there too. Again, just prep, some EQ, take out low end I didn't need. And then what we ended up with, kind of almost the final sound of the snare. And the kick. After that, I grouped them together, bus, group, track stack, whatever your DAW calls it. We all kind of know these words are interchangeable. Okay, from there, I took an EQ, I balanced it. I just did a little bit of sculpting because EQing all the samples together makes a huge difference than EQing them individually, right? Then I added some compression, kind of made it feel a bit more fuller, really limited the dynamic range of the sound. So it wasn't like really thick punch and then like a little bit of fizz, but it like evened it out. And in drum and bass, you want consistency, okay? Especially with your main hits, your big kick and your big snare, not the ghosts, okay? Then after that, it was kind of character stuff, a little bit of compression. 4 characters, there's some parallel stuff going on. Distortion, I like the crunch. I like an old school, like hip hop kind of processing to my drums. And, you know, some people like super precise, super clean. I want some character, you know, I want to feel it, you know. Yeah, we went from there. And again, adjusting within the context of other sounds. So I had the kick kind of playing, even though I was only working on the snare. But hearing the kick activates a different part of your ear, which in turn makes you hear the snare a little bit different, you know? So every context matters, okay? Even when just building up samples. And by the time I got done, I just bounced that sample out. And now I'm at a new starting point of putting it in the track to where I can do some EQ for balance later on, because if I have like a weighty bass line, I might want to take some of that low end out of the kick. You know what I mean? If I have another like percussion layer going on, it might have a different sound as soon as like that like little shaker moment and the snare hit, you know? So you got to think of these things. It's always, the context always changes, but your bass sound, you want it in a good spot. And that's where we got to, I think, in this video. So that was a long one, but this is a kind of a long process. And I would have done it a lot faster had I not been talking through it. But had I not talked through it, it would not have helped you. So here we are. Hope that helped. I'm gonna edit this down, but yeah, part 2, we'll talk about processing the whole drum group. Okay? See you there.